Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Nordic Sound channel. Now, before we start getting caught up on all of the Midgardsblot band announcements that have happened over the last few months while my head has been in the clouds, I wanted to just take a moment to thank you guys for the awesome responses to the video I did on the new Vardruna music video and song Hedoton. I was trying something new, as I said in that video, and honestly, it was really beautiful to me for the first time really seeing this channel's main goal catalyze around that video. Kati Raun, I think, put it really well in the last interview, or in the interview that I did with her, where she said that, like, this is community. This is community. And that's really all I've ever wanted this to be, right? In this niche subculture around Nordic music, most of us connect mostly with people over the internet, and it can get a little isolating, maybe a little lonely, if you're really into stuff like Vardruna and Heilung and you don't have many people in your immediate, like, meet space friend circle to talk to you about it. So I really wanted the Nordic Sound channel to not be a typical YouTube channel dynamic where I make something or I talk and you guys go, oh, that's nice, nice job. That's never really the dynamic I've wanted here on the Nordic Sound channel. It's always been about community, creating a space for people to come together and feel comfortable and open enough to actually talk about how they feel about music. Because, you know, a patron said it best in our last deep listening, and that is that learning how to talk about music is, in a way, learning how to talk about yourself and how to process your emotions. So I hold very true to that, where I think that this channel is at its best when people sort of come together and feel open to add their thoughts, their impressions about the music that we all love. So it was really beautiful for me to see all of that come together around that video. And to that end, it has encouraged me to take another whack at the idea of doing individual album reviews, because that seems to be a really good opportunity to, while the This Month in Nordic Music stuff, that one video is a nice one-stop shopping for, okay, what did I miss this month? I think something is missing in those from those individual album reviews, which give us a chance to really focus in on music, an album, an artist, and really talk about that one in particular. So going forward, I am going to try doing some individual album reviews this month, sort of see what happens. As I said, it's all about making this sustainable for me since I am a grad student. But in a perfect world, I think it'd be really cool to do those individual album reviews throughout the month for things like the Tears Battle Ballads, Korpiklani's new album, so on and so forth. And then at the end of the month, do a sort of like play-by-play of what happened this month. So expect that in the future. I'm going to try that again, but be gracious with me, trying to find the time amongst all the moving and the semester wrapping up. But enough about me, right? So in the spirit of community, what I want for this video here on the Midgardsblot band announcements is I'm just going to go through all of the bands that have been announced over the last few months, share my thoughts with the intention and with the expectation and the hope that you also do the same down in the comments section below. So don't forget to like this video. It is the easiest way, the most direct way, maybe even the only way to tell YouTube more of this. Please support this. That like button is very powerful. So let's get into it. Okay, one last preface, all right? I am only going to talk about the bands announced at Midgardsblot that I feel like I can actually offer something of substance about. So, if I don't mention a band here, like Sagman and Vulture Industries, there may be others as well, it's only because I don't feel like I have much to say about them because I'm not that familiar with them. And that's what I love about festivals, right? Is this sort of forces you to familiarize yourself with other bands while you're there. So I'm looking forward to getting to know them by watching their sets. But if you are in particular interested in those bands and I don't offer my thoughts on them, please leave a comment below and talk about why you are excited to see them and what makes you love their music. So let's just talk about the elephant in the room here with Testament. Thrash metal legends. It's a metal festival. We don't often get a lot of thrash metal at Midgardsblot. Yeah, black metal has a lot of influence and elements of thrash metal, but like just pure unadulterated thrash metal, not often we get to see that at Midgardsblot, especially not such a high octane legendary band like Testament. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Testament for whatever reason, it's like if Metallica's And Justice for All album and Slayer's Reign in Blood album had a baby, and only got the best traits from each. That's Testament's sound. And for me, for other bassists like me, they're a very bass-forward band, which is why my favorite song from them and one of my favorite metal tracks ever is Souls of Black. That legendary bass intro into just like, it's just such a good song. So if you've never listened to Testament, just put on Souls of Black, and even though it's not like their most thrashy, their most intense song, I just personally think it's their best. So, and on top of that, I've never seen Testament live, but everyone who has tells me they put on an amazing live show, and that's what we want here at Midgardsblot. So it's going to be really awesome to see legends like Testament at our Midgardsblot festival, so really looking forward to it. All right, now I am just going to get it out of the way and talk about the band that I am most hyped for, so I don't have to be sort of anticipating it throughout this whole video. Grand Magus. Let me explain myself. Grand Magus, I fell in love with them in high school, and I listened to Hammer of the North, which is to this day one of my favorite albums of all time. All right, so I have that really long history with Grand Magus. On top of that, I took Alyssa to see them when they came through the States in 2019, I think, just a few months before everything went to shit. It's one of my last beautiful memories before we were all cooped up inside for a few years. Grand Magus toured with Amon Amarth, Arch Enemy, I think, and definitely At the Gates. And, you know, of all of those bands, that was Alyssa's favorite, and to this day she still puts on Hammer of the North too. Sometimes I'll walk into her just like getting down to At Midnight They Get Wise or Lord of Lies. So that album is just so friggin' good for at least in terms of like bands that take that Judas Priest sound and run with it. Grand Magus is awesome. And then on top of that, if you guys have been keeping up with these videos, you know that I've been asking for like a trad metal, classic metal act on the lineup for some time, and this is one hell of a way to satisfy that wish of mine, because this is one of my favorite trad metal bands around. And then on top of that, talking about how their live shows go, to put things into perspective, Grand Magus, a three-piece with a singer that also plays bass. So really you have a drummer, a singer who stands at the mic, and then you have one guitarist that has to hold down the fort, or hold the fort, right? So a band like that, sharing a stage with Amon Amarth, Arch Enemy, At the Gates, these larger, more extreme, more heavy metal bands, they put on just as good of a show and commanded that stage just as well as those bigger acts, despite being a trad metal three-piece act. So these guys really know how to put on a live show. And if you have listened to their stuff and it's like, it's a little too Judas Priesty for you, or if you've never seen them before, I really hope that so many of you get converted during their live show, because they are just such a treat, right? And if you haven't listened to them before, just put on the album Hammer of the North, and you might see why I am so crazy about these guys. It's going to be so cool to see them live. Really looking forward to it. And next up, we have Odium, which is black metal in that synth-laden, juicy style of Emperor, so it's pretty fitting that they are both sharing the bill here at Midgardsblot this year. It's almost like it's celebrating that kind of black metal that was almost run out of town in the 90s. How dare you put synths in our black metal? And nowadays it's a pretty strong subgenre of black metal. So it's going to be really cool to see both of these bands here at Midgardsblot. I don't really have much else to say about Odium other than I'm just super stoked to see them. Didn't think I'd really get the chance to see them ever. And if you're not really up to date on their sound, the album from Odium is Sad Realm of Stars. And just put that on, you'll see where the Emperor influence comes in, but they've got their own style, their own flavor that I think you might enjoy, especially if you are a fan of Emperor. So definitely looking forward to Odium. It's going to be super cool to see them command the stage. Vader, the Polish death metal legends. Here's what I love about Vader. They started out as a trad metal band, right, as classic heavy metal, but by the 90s they had moved firmly into death metal. But they had not left behind that trad metal spirit. So while their music is death metal, their attitude, their aesthetic, and their style is very old school. And I think, like, if I can be tongue in cheek, right? You guys know I'm a metalhead, so I mean this in good humor, right? The best way to see how that style comes through is the fact that you can read their logo. You can read Vader in their logo. And I think that is just like the easiest way to see sort of like how that old school style or that old school spirit sticks around in Vader's music, despite them being a death metal band. And they've been around for so long. If I remember correctly, their breakthrough album was Necropolis, but I might just be misremembering that as their breakthrough album because it is their most popular album. But regardless, if you have never listened to Vader before, safe bet, put on Necropolis. You'll get a really good idea of what to expect from them this year. It is going to be so cool to see them live. And next up, it is great to see an American band, especially from the Pacific Northwest, with Uada. Now, I don't know if non-Americans are very familiar with sort of like the dynamics of the heavy metal scenes in the United States, but at least from my perspective, the Pacific Northwest is just a breeding ground right now. It is a hot spot for really cool, interesting, new ideas being sort of like played around with, messed around with, is in the American Pacific Northwest. Whether it is death metal in the style of Uada, prog in the style of Yob, stoner metal in the style of Red Fang, or black metal in the style of Wolves in the Throne Room, there is just so much cool metal coming out of the Pacific Northwest. So it's really awesome to me to see sort of like Uada coming to Midgardsblot as the almost the ambassadors of the Pacific Northwest heavy metal scene at Midgardsblot. So that's going to be pretty cool. Now, Uada is pretty much most often compared to Magua, but to a fault. A lot of people think that they're a carbon copy of Magua, not very original. I mean, that's okay. You're very valid in feeling that way, but maybe this is too meta of a take, but I just don't think anything is original and everything is just sort of a retake on what has come before. So do we really want Magua's sound dying whenever Magua stops playing, or do we want people to pick up the torch? I'm in favor of the latter, right? So Uada is similar to Magua, but they do have their own aesthetic and style that I think is really neat. Their most popular and probably their most celebrated album is Jinn, but personally, I just think Cult of a Dying Sun is a cooler album. I think it sounds better. I think the songs are more interesting. But it's up to you. If you sort of want to see what all the hype is about, check out Jinn. If you want to very quickly be brought up to speed on what everyone is really digging about Uada, that's the album to check out. But if you want to see what I like about Uada, Cult of a Dying Sun is such a cool album to check out. I mean, like, essentially, they're a melodeath band that's heavier on the mela than they are the death. And that's all right with me because, as you guys have probably pieced together, as I don't talk about it that much, I'm not the biggest fan of, like, just straight up death metal. Cannibal Corpse, Slipknot, that style of metal has never really done much for me. And, I'm seeing Cannibal Corpse next week with Amon Amarth at Red Rocks, but I'm going to Red Rocks for Amon Amarth, not so much for Cannibal Corpse. I have plenty of friends who have tried to convert me, and I don't know what it is. Maybe someday I'll see the light, but who knows. And then, before I get sidetracked, the last thing I will say about Uada is they're one of those bands where even if people aren't the biggest fans of their albums, they always walk away from their live shows on cloud nine, because Uada puts on an electric live show. So even if you listen to their albums and you go, not really for me, it's definitely worth at least checking out their set at Midgardsblot, because they put on a pretty good one. All right, now the last heavy metal band that I have to talk about is Berserk. So they're a young band from Horton, a young local band to Midgardsblot's area, and I saw a lot of older folks, like, in good spirits, taking the piss out of how young this band looks. Most of it was just people being like, holy shit, are these 20-year-olds? I feel so old because these look like kids to me. And, that's always funny, but, like, need I remind you guys that last year there was also a young metal band. They might have been local. Rune, 2U's, they put on one of the best sets at Midgardsblot, and barely anyone saw them because they're like a young name. But the Gildehallen they played in, the power went out halfway through. The drummer kept it going until the power came back on. They just put on such a powerful set. They had so much energy. And what I'm really getting at here, right? And I'm going to get up on a soapbox. We all love seeing those big names and lights at these festivals, right? Testament, Emperor, Amon Amarth, Enslaved, Tyr. We love seeing those massive names. But we really can't forget that those biggest bands started somewhere, right? And the point I want to make is that if we want to see a bright future for heavy metal, we have to support the younger generation. We have to support and cultivate an awesome culture and atmosphere for these young bands to feel comfortable performing at these festivals. Otherwise, they're not going to get the experience. They're going to feel outside of everything, which isn't a great thing to do to a new generation. And not to mention that these damn kids are always coming up with really cool ideas. And so I really love seeing what the new generation is doing with heavy metal. I'm not the new generation anymore. I feel like I was yesterday, and now I don't recognize anything that these damn kids are doing. But anyway, soapbox to conclude it, it's so important for us to support these new metal bands. It's so important for us to show support for these young bands that are up and coming that need the experience. And if we really want to show that heavy metal has a cool future and that we're a welcoming culture, we cannot forget to support the new bands and the young bands especially, right? So they're just getting started out and they need our support. So you will see me front row at Berserk, and I hope to see you too. All right, so those are the metal bands I have to talk about. So let's take off our heavy metal hats and put on our medieval, pagan, dark folk hats to talk about Songleikr, Nytt Land, Runehild, Folkeport for Nordavinden. So let's start with Songleikr, because this is going to be so friggin' cool to see live. If you're not familiar, Songleikr is a medieval folk trio comprised of some of the core members of Heilung, Christopher, and Maria, with Ingrid Galadriel also on vocals. Now, there is sort of like the current generation of dark folk, which is, very much, the pillars we talk about here, Heilung and Vardruna. They're sort of like this new wave of dark folk, pagan folk, medieval folk music. It's sort of like it's all about scale, scope, majesty, spectacle, right? But there's this generation of this style of music that came before Vardruna and Heilung blew up around 2010 that is very much based out of like medieval and Viking markets. The idea of sitting around a fire, just like we're familiar with at Midgardsblot. We do this for a reason at this festival. This style of music where everyone's at a medieval market wearing their old style clothes. They have acoustic medieval instruments and they sort of like play traditional leaning music, but with like a medieval flair to it. And that is the style of music that Maria and Christopher are playing from Heilung, are sort of like using Songleikr as an outlet for. So don't expect Heilung style music with Songleikr. Instead, expect the style of music. A whole bunch of people wearing wool, sitting around a fire. One of them is playing a mandolin or a cittern. The other one's playing a drum. One's singing. It's a more intimate and again traditional leaning style of music. Before Heilung and Vardruna sort of like exploded on the scene and sort of redefined what this style of music looks like on like an international scale, there was a whole generation of pagan medieval folk. Before Vardruna and Heilung from like the 90s, right, and the early 2000s. That is where so much of this music style we all love comes from. And just to be honest, as much as I love Vardruna and Heilung, you guys know that I don't have to like plead my case. I prefer that older generation that's more traditional leaning, because it's no mystery that I myself am more traditional leaning. I play traditional music after all. So if you never listened to them, pretty easy. They have one album, Gottfolk. It's an amazing album. It gets so much playtime around this apartment, in our car. It's just beautiful through and through. You get to hear the aspects of the music that are more traditional leaning, but then you also hear like sort of the more experimental stuff, but still all in that vein of like acoustic music, a few musicians playing in a space together. And they capture the essence and the spirit of that music so beautifully in the album Gottfolk. So it's going to be such a treat to see them live at Midgardsblot, because it's the perfect setting for it. Next up, Nytt Land. These Siberian shamans are coming back again to follow up to their 2022 performance to play for us again at Midgardsblot. Now, full disclaimer, I didn't get to see them in 2022. Not bitter at all. I was helping the fellows at the Nordic Mythology podcast with their soundboard that they needed help with. So I had to miss Nytt Land's set last time around. So this is almost like vindication or retribution for me to finally be able to see them again. Especially because there's just so much cool material on Torum, their newest album, that I really want to see live. But then we can't really forget that a lot of people, and maybe this is just from my perspective, but a lot of people came to Midgardsblot in 2022 not really knowing who Nytt Land were. They knew them as a band that had opened for Vardruna on a tour, but no one was very familiar with them. But then after their set, they were one of the bands that people were talking about the most. So like that's the power their live set has. They were one of the most talked about bands, if not one of the fan favorites from that year at Midgardsblot. The underdogs, the sleepers that ended up conquering a lot of the conversation. So going to be super cool to see them live. Glad I'm getting a second chance to see their set. They put on such a unique show. The whole Siberian perspective is just so needed in this dark folk scene. And they just do so much interesting stuff with it. So it's going to be really cool to see them live. I really hope that you make time to see their set. And then last up, rounding it off, Runehild, Folkeborg for Nordavinden. We come to expect this, and for a good reason, because as a lot of us like to say, is it really Midgardsblot without them? Probably not, right? They are the heart and soul of this festival, and they are, despite the fact that I see them every year, they're who I look forward to significantly as just a core part of the experience and why I go to Midgardsblot. So really looking forward to all of that, especially because Runehild, as I've pointed out, just keeps pumping out albums. Has she already put out 2 this year, probably? Of Darkness and Light is the most recent one. Looking forward to reviewing that one. It's so good. It's just going to be a really good time to see them, as it is always, right? But also, disclaimer, if you're going to see Runehild in the Gildehallen, get there early. Okay, last year that line wrapped around the food court. A lot of people ended up not being able to get in because the room reached capacity. So if you want to see Runehild, she has a huge draw, understandably. So just make sure you get there early, or else you might not be able to see her, right? Or you have to wait until people filter out so you can go in. So just disclaimer about people who might be going for the first time. Those Gildehallen sets are fairly in demand, and you want to make sure that you plan accordingly. All right, now, as a little treat for those of you who have stuck around to the end, as is tradition, I'm going to give 3 bands that I would love to see at Midgardsblot this year still, or even if not this year, next year, because I have to be realistic, because as the announcements grow and grow, my wish list realistically dwindles because they can only have so many bands and so many kinds of bands announced still to go for 2024. So these are 3 bands I'm holding out hope for. Krauka. If you're not familiar, Krauka is from that previous generation, that old school style of medieval folk music. They've been around since the 90s, if I understand correctly. And they just put out a new album too. I'm going to be reviewing it. I know that there's room maybe for more bands in that style since they usually play in the Gildehallen. And Krauka, because they've been around for so long and they have a new album out, I just think it's the perfect opportunity to have that band that's been around the block for quite a while come and play for us, because that'd be a really cool experience for those of us who are really into this medieval pagan dark folk thing. And then, of course, Lindy Fi and De Farna, they're perfect for Gildehallen. Their atmosphere would be perfect for Gildehallen. And then also By Norse, her record label is very affiliated with Midgardsblot, so I think the chances would be high that if there's any room left, maybe she could play. That would be so awesome. I would do anything to be able to experience that music in the Gildehallen setting. It'd be so cool. And now, very last thing. Let me just give my completely out there, not gonna happen, but I would be on the floor if it did. But these guys are like headliner level, so maybe it won't. Maybe for 2025 we could see them. High on Fire. I have a Matt Pike for President bumper sticker on my car and on my banjo case. Process that as you will. You know, I know stoner metal is not Midgardsblot's speed, but Matt Pike himself is just like such a legend. From Sleep onwards, he's been such an influential force in just heavy metal in general. A lot of people just call him, like the natural successor to Lemmy Kilmister. I agree with it, but a lot of people might be like, no, there's no replacing Lemmy. I understand. I'm a bassist, but I don't know.